Hello, my name is Chris, and this is the story of the film Flash of Genius. The movie starts with Robert Kearns inside of a Greyhound bus on his way to Washington, D.C., convinced that the vice president had invited him before being escorted away by two policemen into a mental institution. 3 years prior, Robert is attending church with his family before driving home in a rainstorm. He becomes annoyed with the windshield wipers, which irritates his troubled vision and how inefficient it is, almost running into another car to prove his point. Later at night, he examines how his eyes work and then spends hours working on the family car to create a wiper based off of the human eye. In the morning, Phyllis, Robert's wife, is taking care of the kids while Robert heads off to work and warns her not to use the wipers. At college, Robert teaches his students about ethics, and while resting at a bench, he mumbles to himself about the windshield wipers. At night, he and his two sons, Timmy and Dennis, continue to work on the windshield wipers. After soldering two pieces together, the windshield wiper begins to work. To celebrate, the family heads out to a diner and Robert tells the family his plan of becoming the manufacturer for the wipers, creating the Kearns Corporation. Robert shows off his invention at a business meeting with Gil Previck, a longtime friend of his, and two others. The men are impressed with his invention, less so when they learn that Robert plans to be the sole manufacturer for the product. The scene cuts to Robert and Phyllis driving to a party, having dinner with Previck and his wife. There, Phyllis tells the story of how Robert got his eye issues due to a wine cork that shot into his eye and nearly blinded him. Robert is pulled away from the party by Gil and another man, discussing more about the intermittent wipers, and he learns that Ford is interested in what they have, as are other major car companies. However, he is doubtful about showing off his product but is convinced by the two after they promise they won't show the internals. He is given a new car to put the intermittent wipers in. At one of Ford's facilities, he meets Frank Sertin, Vice President of Research and Development. While showing off the wipers, there is a problem with one of the fuses that almost ruins the showing, but he's able to fix it and impress the researchers, and they plan to give him the specs to one of their cars. While spending time with his family, he and his wife have a conversation about what makes someone successful. At dinner, they read out the weather report in the newspaper, praying for some rain when they see there's no rainfall. The next morning, they receive their wish as there's heavy rain coming down and the family goes out for a drive. The next scene, we see Macklin Tyler, one of the higher-ups of the Ford company, and Frank Sertin with Dick Gordon talking about selling the intermittent wipers before inviting Gil and Robert to join the conversation. They talk about Robert's manufacturing plans as well as needing to send a working unit to Washington for approval, which he agrees to after some pressure from Macklin. Later, the family are at a large warehouse, intending to possibly rent it for their manufacturing, which Robert thinks is perfect for their needs. We also see him chatting with a Motorola representative about electronic parts, quickly moving forward with his plans. 3 months pass, at a restaurant where Gil and Robert are meeting, where Gil has some bad news for the excited Robert. Ford is backing out of the deal, citing that they're not interested anymore and not ready. Unfortunately, they already have the unit and they don't know when they're going to get it back. More months pass and Robert, frustrated, crashes a Ford dealers convention where they're showing off the newest Mustang, as well as the intermittent wipers. He is then escorted out by security. At another meeting with the Previcks, he argues that Ford stole his design, having taken apart one of their motors. Unfortunately, not much can be done, as Ford is slow to respond and the patent courts are jammed as well. Robert desperately decides to try to sue Ford himself, with no backing from Gil or Previck Automotive, which ultimately causes stress for everyone in the family. He starts to become paranoid and even more obsessive, becoming suspicious of one of his assistants and even breaking into a man's car to steal parts. At the tipping point, he boards a Greyhound bus, the same bus at the start of the movie, to go to Washington, D.C. There, he is escorted to a mental state facility and his wife is alerted to Robert's mental health. 2 months pass and Robert has a conversation with one of the psychiatrists about his obsession before being finally let go to see his family again when he admits he doesn't want to fight Ford anymore. However, despite his words, he hires a lawyer about the case once again, having a distant conversation with his eldest son about it. Gregory Lawson, the lawyer, discusses with the family about their plans of fighting Ford. Robert talks with Gil about fighting Ford once again, in the process getting the patents to his design, but Previck Automotive steps out of the Ford case entirely afterwards. A year passes and the couple meets with Gregory about the case again, where Ford has offered the Kerns a settlement outside of the court for $250,000, but they will not admit they stole from Robert. While his wife is on board, he is not. Ultimately, the lawyer and the firm pull out from the case when they can't convince him to agree to the settlement. Phyllis then confronts Robert at home, unable to handle all the stress, separates from him. For years have passed, Robert now is divorced from his wife and estranged from their children. In a meeting with his eldest son, Dennis, he attempts to convince him to help him, which he refuses. When driving home, Robert meets Charlie DeFeo, a representative of Ford who offers to settle this outside of court for millions of dollars. Again, he refuses, but while working late at night, Dennis visits him and offers his help. Finally, after years, the case is finally taken to court on August 14. With the help of his family, they look at documents, anything that'll help with the trial. He also asks one of his daughters about Phyllis and if she'll be attending the trial. At the trial, the judge introduces the case to the jury. Robert and the Ford lawyers have a back and forth, whether or not it was possible that he designed it first or if the engineers had created their own version of it. They question the witnesses, which include Robert, who shares the champagne cork story, Macklin Tyler, and an expert on electronic engineering. On the night before the last day of the trial, Charlie visits the family one last time with another offer. $30 million, with no admittance of guilt on Ford's part. Robert asks his family if he should take the deal, but they all back him, declining the offer. On the final day of the trial, Robert is questioned by Ford's lawyers about the state of his mental health and his certainty of the words Macklin spoke. He is unsettled, but the trial has a small recess where he and his family can take a breather before continuing. After the recess and after the defendants make their final defense, Robert approaches the jury and makes an impassioned plea. Ultimately, the jury finds Ford guilty of infringing on Robert's patents and award him $10,100,000. He has finally won after years of litigation. When the trial is over, he holds one last conversation with his ex-wife before it's interrupted by former students of Robert. The movie ends with the kids and Robert at the same diner from when the family was celebrating their invention of the intermittent wiper. Following the Robert Kerns versus the Ford Motor Company trial, Robert also sues the Chrysler Corporation and receives $18.7 million. Okay, guys, thanks for watching. Please consider subscribe if you enjoy this video. It promotes the channel and encourages us to put out more content.